Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 19. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I've started this podcast because I believe that companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talents. The podcast brings a different lens to the employee experience, a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional human resources perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to debate, discuss and share best practices on the key components that foster employee engagements and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. Now let's be real, employee disengagement is a big issue. Only 30% of employees worldwide feel engaged at work, and 20% declare they just don't give a crap about their work. The other 50% are in the twilight zone of engagement, not fully engaged, not completely switched off either. There's not much companies can do with the 20% paycheck suckers who just show up at work because they have to in order to collect their checks. Instead, companies should focus on the 50% of employees semi-engaged. That's where those companies can make a difference and impact their bottom line. Here, our guests share with you how we can make it happen together. Today's guest is Katie Burke. Katie is the Chief People Officer at HubSpot, a leading provider of marketing automation software based in Boston, Massachusetts. Beyond its marketing automation platform, HubSpot is widely acclaimed for its company culture, which was codified by Dharmesh Shah, founder and CTO of the company. The HubSpot Culture Code has now been viewed over 2 million times on Slideshare. Today with Katie, we will talk about why the employee experience is a key differentiator in an ultra-competitive talent market, what HubSpot's Culture Code is about, what are the employee experience drivers, and how HubSpot measures its EX and how the company ties EX to business outcomes. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. For more information, visit fusionalliance.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes. You can open up the iTunes app and type in Stefan Vincent or EX Podcast and you will find us there. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Katie Burke. Katie is the Chief People Officer at HubSpots, a leading provider of marketing automation software based in Boston. Katie, thanks for being with us today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
So who is Katie Burke and what a typical day for you looks like?
So I am the Chief People Officer, as you said, at a crazy fast-growing company, global company based here in Cambridge, but as you might imagine, with offices in 7 locations, the calendar and the clock is nonstop. So there actually is no typical day for most folks who work at HubSpot, but particularly in a people function. So you can imagine on any given day, I'm doing a combination of candidate interviews, manager feedback, collaborating with our team to identify and grow the best talent, garnering employee feedback, chatting with my colleagues in Singapore. There really is no typical day, and that's actually part of what I love about what I do, is that it's constantly changing and evolving even as we grow as a company.
So before we get into how many offices you have, how many employees, and so forth, For those who are not familiar with HubSpot, what does the company do and how do you define the uniqueness of the company?
Sure. So HubSpot as a company is 11 years old, and our founders started the company with the basic premise that the way people tried to do marketing by interrupting their way into people's lives was fundamentally broken. And so as a company, our product is primarily inbound marketing and sales software. But what we're most proud of is that we help small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses globally grow. And so what that means is our tool typically targets customers with roughly 10 to 200 employees, although we have smaller customers and larger customers as well. But we help them blog, email their customers, interact with their customers in more dynamic ways. And we help their sales professionals focus on helping their business grow versus doing kind of boring back-end tasks that feel more tedious. And so the way that I look at it is we're in the growth business. We sell software products that help small to medium-sized businesses grow, but we're really most proud of the fact that we help organizations and partner agencies globally expand their reach and interact with customers in highly lovable ways.
You mentioned that you have an office in Singapore. How many offices and how many areas do you cover in the world, and how many employees do you have right now?
We have 7 offices globally, and we have 1,700 employees globally in each of those locations total. So you can imagine we have some smaller offices. So, for example, our Tokyo office is just about 12 folks. Our Berlin office, which is our newest office, is just above 30 folks. And you can imagine that some offices are bigger than others. Cambridge is obviously our biggest, but we also have folks who work remotely. So never a dull moment around here, that's for sure.
I can imagine. What is interesting with your background is that you moved into that culture and experience role from a marketing background versus a traditional HR background. What was the transition like?
Yes, so I was fortunate enough to come from the business, as you said. So I ran our internal and external communications for HubSpot's initial public offering, which was in 2014. And after the IPO concluded, our founders came to me and said they wanted me to take over culture. And to be honest, I was already pretty heavily involved in the launch of our culture code document, which has gone viral and has really set the tone for what's possible with our organization. And so I've always been really passionate and involved in HubSpot's culture. The opportunity to work on it full time was truly a unique experience and an opportunity I wanted to make sure I took advantage of. So I think the benefits that I bring to the role are a marketing background, a passion for the core of what we do as a company, and some creative, non-traditional ideas. But one of the best parts of my role is I've gotten to spend the last few years learning from people who have made HR their craft. And so I get the benefit of bringing a new perspective, but also learning from some folks who have both made mistakes and had some big wins before me. So I like to think I bring a nice balance of hiring some great folks who came from a core HR background to help our candidates and employees, but also complementing it with some new energy ideas that help us innovate.
What was the reception from HR people when you came into that role?
I think anytime you're coming in new to a role, people's biggest fears are that you don't have a deep respect for what they do. And one of the best parts for me of working with HR professionals, both prior to taking on the new role and having been in the new role for a while, is I think I have a profound respect for the work they do. And now, if anything, that's only deepened as I spend more time with them. And so I think I was fortunate that the HR professionals that I had already worked with knew how much I respected them from their day-to-day work. And then for folks who, I didn't have the chance to know who are outside of HubSpot, I'm sure there was some skepticism. But I also think at their core, people are folks who love to learn and grow. They want to support their business, and they want to be welcoming to candidates and employees alike. So I feel like I've been very lucky and consider myself an honorary member of that community.
Good. Why is the employee experience becoming such an important topic, not only at HubSpot, but in other innovative and disruptive companies?
I think for most growth companies and most companies that pride themselves on employing top talent, people are your most precious resource. So it's no surprise that a focus on creating a remarkable employee experience at scale is something so many organizations are trying to do. And I think that is just going to continue to intensify as the battle for talent goes up. And so I truly think that we're just getting started in how the employee experience is scaling and evolving. And I'm proud that HubSpot's been somewhat on the forefront of helping lead the charge there.
So in your opinion, what are the EX drivers and how would you define an ideal culture?
I think employee experience and candidate experience candidly cover every element of how a candidate or employee interacts with your brand. So that starts long before someone's considering a role at your organization when they're just researching you online, perhaps as a customer or a partner. That starts when a friend of theirs or a family member works at your organization or company and shares a story or a narrative about what it's like to work there. And then it includes who you hire, who you promote, who you incentivize, who you award, how your leaders behave. All of those things are key ingredients as it relates to culture and employee experience. And so I think one of the mistakes a lot of folks make is trying to control or minimize the employee experience in some ways. From my perspective, yes, people operations plays a critical role in developing the employee experience, but so does everyone in your organization. Your CEO, your CTO, your founders, your management team, all of those folks are critical ingredients in your employee experience. It doesn't just reside in core HR.
So let's dive a little bit more into that topic. Specifically, implementing a successful EX strategy is only successful if it's driven equally, as you mentioned, by the leadership and by the employees. How does HubSpot balance this equation?
I think the way that we do that is with consistent, clear, and transparent feedback. So at most companies, employee experience surveys are done annually or biannually. Most of the most interesting and juicy feedback is redacted. And to be honest, the management team just uses it to affirm that the company is heading in the right direction. HubSpot for years has used the employee net promoter score system to get quarterly feedback from our employees on what's working and what isn't. And we share almost everything, good, bad, and ugly, with our entire employee base. So they can actually read what their colleagues said. They can read the good things. They can read the things that we need to improve on. That's kind of one of the most important dials that we use to keep our finger on the pulse of what's working and what isn't within our organization.
It seems like it's a common theme across multiple guests that I've had on the show so far. It's about building a culture of candor and sort of vulnerability as well, knowing that everyone from the top down has to be candid about feedback and about trying to experiment things of failing. Is it something that is very much in the DNA at HubSpot?
Oh, absolutely. So we actually try and incentivize failure here, so much so that we have something called the Failure Forum, where we actually encourage leaders to share not just their greatest accomplishments, but frankly, things that did not go so well for them. Good. And we really feel like that's part of, it's one of the most critical ingredients. If you're just talking about your triumphs and the things that have gone perfectly for you, you're not learning to the maximum of your abilities. So we really feel as though sharing what's not working is as important as sharing what isn't. And so our culture of transparency is a critical ingredient in making that happen. To your point, I think especially as we are working really hard to make our employees and candidates proud of our diversity and inclusion initiative, part of feeling like you belong at a company is creating an environment where vulnerability is not just accepted, it's incentivized. And so we've actually started to we had an event earlier this year where we used a moth storytelling format to encourage employees to share stories about things like trying to win the pride of your parents when you're from a traditional household, adopting a child who is from a different racial identity than you, sharing conversations that are not part of typical par for the course work dialogues, but sharing them with the trust and integrity that it's not only acceptable to do so, but you will be welcomed as part of that that conversation. So I think vulnerability is a key ingredient in any company that wants to grow and be inclusive as we do. I think we're still evolving as it relates to how we execute on that, but I certainly think vulnerability is an important ingredient. So
you touch a very good point about storytelling. Now, there's storytelling, there's also the ability to deliver the message, to the audience. And HubSpot is one of the leading providers in marketing automation softwares, and you do this very well on the B2B or B2C side. Do you leverage any of this expertise and probably even the software on the B2E, business to employee side, when you try to interact and communicate with your employees?
Yeah, we do. So one of the lessons I think we leverage from the marketing side of our business is that human beings don't want to be shouted at. They don't want to be interrupted. They want to be communicated with in a way that feels relevant, contextual, and frankly, just really human. So we always want to make things as personalized as possible. One of the things that people often do when they're, using traditional HR speak, for lack of a better word, is they become extremely formal. They're like, thank you so much, Stefan, for regards. We look forward to exploring your candidacy. And we want it to feel like you're joining an organization you'd be proud to be a part of. And we really want to keep that tone professional, of course, but conversational as well. And our goal is that even if you don't end up joining our team, that you learn something as part of the process. So we, like every company in the world, are not perfect. We have candidates and employees who aren't a great fit here, or for whom their evolution at HubSpot doesn't work out as they anticipated. My goal is that they leave here regardless, having had a wonderful experience and learn more about themselves, about the company, and about the marketing world. And so we try and take that approach that we use on the marketing side, apply it here, and continuously evolve as we grow.
So we talk a lot about nurturing our customers on the marketing side, on the business side. Do you do the same with candidates who may not have been selected right away for a position or opportunity at HubSpot? Do you do this with your current employees and maybe alumni as well?
So we do. So we actually have a gentleman in our accelerated leadership program who's running the nurturing campaigns for our alumni. And one of the things we've started doing is not just highlighting companies that were started by HubSpot alumni, but also featuring job openings that they have there so that our alumni can actually get the benefit of hiring other alums. So I think the way in which we interact with our alumni network is one of the most unique parts of HubSpot. Most people end their relationship with employees after they depart the company. I think Our alumni network is a great competitive advantage for us. And then to your question about candidates, we do use it for some nurturing, particularly for campus candidates. To be completely honest, I think there's even more we can do there as we build and grow. So I think you'll see more from us on the candidate nurturing side, but we do certainly and have certainly experimented with using HubSpot to nurture. I would say we've had some flashes of brilliance as it relates to our execution there, and some opportunities to learn from how we evolve there. So expect even more in that space from us in the years to come.
So it sounds like HubSpot has a very well-defined culture. How do you bring in people from other offices? Right? How do you maintain them engaged into the culture and the purpose of the company when you know that you may be able to see them on a regular basis or interact with them, maybe once a week, once a month? How do you manage that?
Sure. So part of what we've actually started to try and do is make it abundantly clear that our goal as a company is, I love that we have a really strong overarching company culture, but I also love that the culture in our Dublin office is very different from our Portsmouth office, is very different from our Sydney office. So what I always say to people is there should be, somewhat like the U.S. Constitution, there should be inalienable rights as an employee, and that includes for us transparency and autonomy to do great work. But we will have some offices, we will have some teams that are more gregarious and outgoing than others. We will have some teams that build traditions in different offices that I could never have imagined. Our goal is not to create a cookie cutter approach globally. Our goal is actually to use autonomy as a force to ensure that while our global company culture remains strong, it is added to and augmented by our local presence and our local employees coming up with ideas and traditions that we never would have imagined.
So that's totally okay for a company to have sort of subcultures within the organization itself, that not everybody has to play the same game or do the same things. It can vary from, let's say, one team to another, or one office to another, one location to another, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the notion that your sales team and your engineering team are going to function exactly the same is foolish. And so what we try and do instead is say, hey, we want folks to have the same framework, the same context, the same ideals for decision making, but the way in which they get there and how they do their work is something we want to leave flexible and up to those leaders and teams.
It's a good point. It's one of my favorite topics around the employee experience, is really the application of what we do on the customer side to the employee side. And we do a lot of segmentation on the customer side, right? And you mentioned rightfully that someone from the engineering team may not have the same needs, aspirations, motivations from someone from the sales team. But I would challenge that most companies actually just look at the employees as the same bunch of people. They don't really segment the employees. Why is that so?
I think it's a more than fair question. I'm not sure why that happens so much, but I hear and see it from a lot of other leaders. I think it's something that as an industry, everyone needs to probably talk more about and spend more time on. So I'm glad you're pushing folks on it.
So you mentioned that you have offices in different countries. How do you manage the global aspect of building a culture when you have offices in Asia and very different types of behaviors and cultural attributes than Germany or even Ireland or the US? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I think it starts with, first of all, just recognizing going in that you're not trying to replicate a cookie cutter, and your goal should always be learning from the market that you're operating in. So by way of example, Sydney was our first office entering the kind of broader APAC region. And then when we opened up shop in Singapore, selling into parts of Southeast Asia is totally and completely different than, for example, selling into Australia and New Zealand. And so even within regions, even obviously you mentioned Berlin versus Dublin, even within regions, there are significant nuances that to assume our selling motion would be the same is fundamentally flawed. And so what we try and do every time we enter a market, even if we're selling into that market remotely or if we're entering from an employment perspective, is to really learn our stuff, to spend our time talking to people who have entered that market before, to learn from experts, to hear from employees, to hear from prospects and customers. We view that not as an optional part of the consideration process, but rather as an imperative part of making sure that we learn from the best and worst of other people's experiences. So that's kind of how we start. And as we evolve and grow, I actually think the biggest mistakes that most companies make is not having the courage to have that conversation. So we will hear from employees, hey, this is not working, or this is sort of a struggle for us. We will work with them to sort that out. And part of our culture of transparency is actually being okay with the fact that someone will say, it feels like our motion is not right there, or it feels like we need to alter something specifically for a specific market, for a specific employee base, for a specific team. We are not always going to agree on what that should be, but our culture is very much one where folks should feel empowered to share that.
Okay, very interesting. What's the ratio of, let's say, millennials versus Gen Xers and potentially boomers at HubSpot?
We have a very high percentage, like many companies in our space, we have a very high percentage of millennials. But I actually think folks oversimplify what millennials want versus what other kind of age groups want. What we've seen across the board from folks, boomers, millennials, you name it, is a distinct interest in doing work that matters and in having autonomy to get there. And so I actually think the millennial debate and discussion is a little bit overplayed and oversimplified. I think most people I know who are talented want the flexibility to do great work and autonomy to get there. And so my hope is that we provide that for all age groups, all employee locations, all demographics at HubSpot, and that's something we continue to keep an eye on.
I would agree with you. I think it's a bit overblown. I really believe that many, not necessarily all of the people, but many people look for actually welcome flexibility, welcome empowerment, and so forth. It's probably just that the millennials have been more vocal about it than other generations.
I totally agree. I think in some ways, millennials are held accountable for and almost punished in some ways for asking what many of us so badly want. And so do I think there are unique demographics and challenges that relates to our millennial population? Absolutely. Do I think that many of the changes in the modern workforce are just because of millennial demands? No.
And do you think that somehow the millennial bashing is mostly due to people being scared of technological advances and they're just feeling a bit behind and they just take millennials as a scapegoat?
I think it's an oversimplification. I think anytime we say women in the workplace, millennials in the workplace, take your pick of the subset of individuals, every age group, every subgroup, every group I've ever met has both stereotypes associated with it and some folks who are incredibly wonderful and then some folks who are incredibly challenging to deal with. I think, to be honest, it's, partially stereotyping of their generation. Part of it is using outrageous stories or examples as an attempt to vilify an entire generation of folks. And then to your point, part of it is fear. I think we as human beings don't love change. And I think millennials are, in fact, changing our workforce. But I think change is something that's been a constant in the global workforce. And I think over the next, 25 years, especially with the advances of AI, machine learning, and automation, I think we're just going to continue to see more of it. And so I think running away from it is something you do at your peril.
I agree with you. One big push from CEOs on whether or not they should even think about the employee experience is the return on investments, or the ROI. Can you share some tips on how you measure the effectiveness of EX and how you tie it to the company's growth?
Yes, I think, to be candid, I think there are ways we can, and I'm certainly happy to dive in and talk about them, but there are certainly hard costs. So, for example, obviously training and onboarding employees has an associated hard cost. Mm-hmm. Having disengaged employees causes a loss in productivity. Having attrition and turnover certainly creates friction, lost business opportunity, lost revenue for your business, that sort of thing. But I think the cost prevention route of things is actually the wrong way to think about it. I think the better way to think about it is that you can't afford not to have an employee experience strategy, because the reality is if you don't create one, the business down the street is and already has one, and your top competitors will. And so I actually think if you're trying to nickel and dime, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be prudent about the financial implications of your employee experience as you grow. But it does mean that I think most best-in-class companies can't afford to miss out on creating an opportunity like this. So by way of example, I think people think employee experience and just think dollar signs. There are certainly costs associated with a great employee experience, but I actually think most great employee experiences start with the fundamental belief that employees are important and worth investing in. And I think there are a lot of low cost and free things that people can do to make employees a priority that frankly don't break the bank.
So when starting on that employee experience journey at HubSpot, what kind of milestones did you define, and what type of metrics did you put in place to monitor the growth and the expansion of that initiative?
Dharmesh is really the person who deserves the credit. I actually should say that both our founders do. Brian Halligan, our co-founder and CEO, was at a CEO support group, and actually a fellow CEO was the one who told him kind of exactly what I just told you, which is that we couldn't afford to miss out on building a culture that people would truly love. And he tasked, as all good co-founders do, his co-founder with doing it. So Dharmesh then set out the Herculean task of writing our culture code. And so he was the one who actually took the time to document and think about and consider what we stand for as a company. And part of that includes refactoring it on a quarterly basis. So you'll see there are published updates to the culture code from time to time. That's very much intentional. We want the elements of our code to change to reflect the reality of our business and our core employee needs. And so as we think about, that was our first step, was codifying what mattered to us. And then our task becomes just quantifying the degree to which we're living up to those ideals. And that's something we do by measuring both the employee net promoter score on a quarterly basis, things like our retention numbers, things like our Glassdoor employee experience score. All of those things are key ingredients in how we think about how we're doing.
And that culture code is available publicly. So for those interested in learning more about that, where can they find that HubSpot culture code?
Yeah, so it's just at culturecode.com, and over 3 million people to date have checked out the culture code to either help inform how their company thinks about culture, to get some ideas to think about their own growth, and or to just think about building a career at HubSpot. And so highly encouraged, to your point. Hopefully it can be a learning opportunity for folks, even if they're not considering a role at HubSpot.
Sure. Now, can you share with us some employees' experiences that have forced you to rethink how you approach EX?
Sure. Honestly, it happens all the time. So we have a really robust women's initiative, and women's equality is something I care very deeply about as a female leader at the company. But one thing that happened was we were actually hearing from both young men and young women coming into the company right out of school. They wanted to know what we were going to do to build a company that was a remarkable place to work for women. And so, to be honest, it helped drive both the speed at which we rolled out our women's initiative and the degree of investment we put behind it. That was due to their feedback. The other thing is, as we grow as a company, we have a lot more folks who are growing their families. We have a lot more parents, and we've taken a lot of feedback from them on what's changing about their lives, what flexibility they would like, what resources they would need, and built out a program called Parent Spot. So both of those are distinct kind of evolutions of our culture as it relates to feedback from our employees. But to be honest, we're reacting to things all the time that our employees bring to our attention. Those just happen to be two of the bigger items that we've changed as a result of people's feedback.
Okay. Now, HubSpot is celebrated for not only for its business success and the quality of its product, but also for its culture. So maybe it's a tough question, but how would you describe, maybe in 3-4 minutes, what the HubSpot culture is about?
HubSpot's culture, in my opinion, is about providing people with transparency so they can understand the core of our business and what our customers, prospects, and partners need. It's about autonomy, so giving people a lot of runway to do their job in the manner that's most effective for them and our customers. And then I think at its core, it's also about remarkability. And so when we think about what makes a HubSpotter or what makes HubSpot so special, it's really having the courage, insight, and ability to come up with ideas and innovations for our customers that other companies haven't sought out or haven't been able to do. And so those are kind of, as I think about what makes our culture special, those are three of the ingredients that I think make our culture unique and make me proud to work here.
So you were talking earlier about building that experience from the candidate experience to even the alumni. Have you done some sort of journey map of what the ideal employee experience would be at HubSpot?
We have, and we've also done some persona research. So we've really asked we've asked candidates and others for some deliberate feedback on specific aspects of our process. The other thing that we do is we regularly take a look at things like Glassdoor on pieces of the funnel that are broken. The other thing we do is we ask some of our top employees regularly for feedback on what's working for them, what types of growth opportunities they'd like to see, things that we're not currently doing. So we do map out the journey, we map out personas, we get a lot of feedback, and those are all things that we view as absolutely critical to our success as a company.
Now, typically at this point in the podcast, I like to ask a few personal questions so that the audience get to know our guest a bit more intimately.
Sure.
So my first question would be, if you were to invite a historical figure to dinner, who who would that be and why?
So my answer for this one is a little bit random, but actually I just finished a book on President James Garfield, and it was about the fact that he was assassinated, but he actually didn't die as a result of the bullet. He died as a result of medical infections and his doctor's treatments after. He had a really interesting perspective on equality. He was a strong advocate for abolition, and was a noted general for the Union in the Civil War. And so I'm really interested in people who are underestimated, both as part of their living history and in how history is told. So James Garfield would be top on my list.
Interesting. What's the essential item you always take with you when you go on vacation?
I always bring a book, and I always bring a paper book. So I know a lot of folks have made the switch to Kindles and to digital editions of books. I still read paperbacks and hardbacks. I love the smell of a new book. I love holding a new book or an old book, frankly, in my hands. So I still carry hardcover books with me, even as I traipse across, to Singapore and all corners of the earth. I still bring a hard copy book with me.
I would agree as well. I do the same, and I like taking notes and making some graffitis and some notes on a paper book as well.
I do the same.
Well, this question should be an easy one for you. Then, what excites you the most when you go to work?
For me, it's that I still learn something every day. I've been here 5 years, and so, you might think that on a regular Tuesday morning, I might kind of think to myself, this is going to be a traditional boring day. I love that our candidates, our employees, our customers, and frankly, my colleagues are always pushing me and others to get better. So I love that even after all this time, I still learn something every day I'm here.
And what is your favorite food and why?
Oh, this is kind of embarrassing. My favorite food is pizza, and I get made fun of because the joke around here is that I would eat at the kids' table if it were up to me at fancy meals. So I would eat pizza, chicken fingers, fries, and Diet Coke all day if it were up to me. So I am not the best foodie around. There are lots of other wonderful people here who have great taste in food. I like to think I have fun taste in food, but it is certainly not highbrow.
What type of pizza?
I go with Boston's classic Pizzeria Regina pizza, and I go traditional, cheese or pepperoni.
Okay, so I assume you're a Patriots fan?
You know what's funny? I grew up in Vancouver, so I was born here in Boston, but I grew up in Vancouver, and so American football was not something that I got a lot of exposure to. I actually grew up a hockey fan, and so I'm more a hockey fan than anything else. But yes, you can't live in New England without cheering for the Patriots, and their success recently has made it hard not to love them.
Yeah, it's hard to acknowledge for a guy like living in Indianapolis that the Patriots are actually a pretty good team.
Yes, absolutely. I know a lot of people who feel the same way you do, including a bunch of HubSpotters that we've relocated from different parts of the globe. But yes, I'm proud to root for the Patriots.
Is it a requirement when you apply the HubSpot to convert yourself to being a Patriot?
It is not. We actually have a room named after Robert Kraft, who's the owner of the Patriots. Uh-huh. We have a ton of rooms named after Red Sox fans, but we have, I'm sad to say, a bunch of Yankees fans, a bunch of Colts fans, Seahawks fans. The way that I think about it, they make our lives a whole lot more interesting. So it is certainly not a requirement of the role to be a Red Sox or Patriots fan, but it doesn't hurt.
Okay, so if you're from Chicago, from Indianapolis or Seattle, you can easily integrate in the HubSpot culture.
Absolutely, no question.
Is there a way for our listeners to follow you and HubSpot on social media? So we talked about where they can find the culture code. I'm pretty sure that you are very dominant on the social media as well. So what's the way for our listeners to follow you and to follow HubSpot?
So I recommend HubSpot first because, candidly, HubSpot as a company is a whole lot better than I am at overall social media and publishes a whole lot more. So it's just at HubSpot on either Instagram or Twitter are my two favorite places to follow HubSpot. And then I personally am on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Katie, Katie, Burke, Burkie, which is a nickname of my last name. The poor woman who has just my first name and last name has in her Twitter bio that she's not me. So I feel badly for her and actively try and point people in the right direction. But she's a trooper.
Okay, well, I know that you have to go to another meeting in the next few minutes, so I appreciate your time being with us today. Thank you, Katie.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that's so important to us.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.